I also really wish people knew that it was possible. Like, our financial models are showing that it's possible. Like, it's possible to both build something that is beautiful and impactful and that you love, and you make a great return doing it while you're doing good in your community, right? And what's amazing also about this bioregional work is it only makes Anura properties more resilient in the face of climate, right? Like, it's actually giving back to that asset as well. And so I think if more developers started to look at a holistic framework of how are they building, why are they building, what is the community they're building into, and understand that a rising tide helps all ships, then suddenly we'd have a really different framework for building.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Analise Roland, the managing partner behind Anura Capital, a real estate fund built on the principles of regenerative design and focused on boutique hospitality projects. I have a 7-year-old son who absolutely loves math. He even has a math journal that he likes to write down equations, and he'll occasionally put me on the spot with questions like, "Dad, what's 55.5 divided by 3? The other day, he was counting to himself in the car, and when I asked him, he said that he was counting to 1 trillion. 1 trillion, I said? That's going to take you a while. And like the stubborn and determined soul that he is, he quickly disagreed with me and went back to counting. However, with my curiosity piqued, a quick Google search turned up that it would indeed take almost 32,000 years to count one by one to 1 trillion. That's right, 32,000 years. That's a big number, and that is just 1 trillion. That is less than the amount of global private equity that was invested last year alone. $1.35 trillion were invested into private equity deals in 2023. Now, imagine if that same amount of capital was going into investments that underwrote for things like biodiversity, climate, soil, education, and community activation, in addition to the financial bottom line. We would be living in a completely different world. Today's guest, Analise Roland, is someone who I have enjoyed getting to know over the past year as we've looked at different properties for their fund, Anura Capital. Analise is a rare human being that can talk eloquently about regenerative agriculture and local food systems, while in the same breath can fluently go into equity multiples and internal rates of return. As someone who has primarily focused on community-oriented developments, agriculture, and housing, Analise has helped instill in me a newfound appreciation for the power of hospitality as a catalyst for regeneration. Like real estate in general, hospitality gets a bad rap for things like waste and community extraction. But does it have to be that way? Analise certainly doesn't think so. Stay tuned to learn more about how she has gone from working with regenerative agriculture producers in New York to creating a $100 million fund dedicated to regenerative principles and a triple bottom line. Before jumping into the episode, I want to give a shout out to our friends at Humanize Wealth. This is a unique and extraordinary wealth management firm for individuals, families, and foundations who seek social impact, environmental justice, and shared prosperity in addition to financial returns. It is not every day that I come across firms run by purpose-driven professionals that have extensive experience managing investment portfolios that care about the things that we so deeply value in the regenerative movement. They run their company very similarly to ours, where their approach is based on the quality of the relationships that they have with their clients and creating personalized and value-aligned solutions for managing your portfolio. If you are interested to explore the purpose, power, and potential of your wealth, I highly suggest to schedule an introductory call with them by visiting humanizewealth.com. Now, on to the show. And here we go. Analise, I've been wanting to actually get on and record a podcast with you for some time, especially we get to spend a night overlooking the Sailor Sea on the ocean and really getting into your backstory and in regenerative development and females in development. And I was like, this is going to be a great podcast episode. We just need to schedule her. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil. I mean, now we're talking without crabs all over our hands that we were eating. So we can have even the deeper conversation, but it's great to be here with you. And I'm a great fan of everything you're doing and the show and the light that you're shining on our corner of the world in terms of development and impact and how those go hand in hand.
Yeah, and what's so funny is that I had Lindsay Baker on, who is the president and ED of the Living Future Institute, who had kind of challenged me, to be honest, and said, "Where's the female developers?" And I'm like, "That is a great question. Where are the female developers?" And there's a stable that I know that I'm just really excited to even put more spotlight and bring those stories out. And you're certainly at the top of the list here. And I think that's the best place to start and maybe find that thread line of, how did you get into this movement of regeneration? Because it's not even just the development side, it is squarely regeneration.
Oh my goodness. I think I'll start kind of at the place of how I was raised. I was really blessed to be raised both in a very privileged community in California, where I was exposed to a lot of intelligent people and beautiful buildings. And then I was simultaneously also raised in wild land. I was raised on a large ranch in Montana, and I became who I am because of the days that I spent climbing apple trees and riding horses and listening to the wind. And so I had this really unique childhood of this very intimate connection with nature. And then the other side, which, is Southern California, which, while it's beautiful, I don't believe in some pockets has been developed with that kind of wild nature attached to it still in the same way. And, I went to Brown University. I actually studied neuroscience and came out of that asking a lot of questions around how we perceive and how we live and how we engage with one another. And for the last, now over 10 years, I've been an impact entrepreneur. So I've been building companies and spaces, really looking at systems development. And for some reason, the way that my mind grew up and was shaped is I look at systems in what a way that I now know is framed is called regenerative framework, right? For me, it just was normal, right? And so I left Brown and I launched my first company, and it happened by accident. I ended up befriending a bunch of farmers at a farmer's market. No joke. I was working in consulting in New York City and would walk home at night through Union Square, and there's this beautiful farmer's market. And I just started hanging out with these farmers, and they were super down to earth. They were so lovely. And one day, one of them starts complaining, kind of venting to me really about how they can't afford to send their kid to school because they have to do this thing for the barn replacement because one of their major farming contracts fell through. And they had all this leftover produce. And so I ended up basically calling a friend of mine who was a chef and buying the leftover produce from this farmer so that he could send his child to school, and building a company off of that, off of what would happen if we actually bought the leftover produce from regenerative farmers. And that kind of started off my entrepreneurial journey, I would say, into working with farmers. And, at the time, I didn't know the difference between conventional farming and regenerative farming and biodynamic farming. But simultaneously, I was going through a health challenge. And as I started kind of going deeper into my own health journey, I started also learning more about our food system. I started learning about where our food is coming from, how it's being raised, how it's being tended to, the impact that has on soil and on community and mental health. And my jaw dropped. Like, I was heartbroken. And so suddenly I looked at these farmers, and I didn't just see individuals that are hidden, out of view from us because of how grocery and supply chain works. But I saw kind of the unsung heroes that were growing regenerative food in a way that was actually giving back to the soil and giving back to the end consumer. And something just clicked in me. Like, something just really deeply clicked, where I realized that I wanted to use the skill set I did have to help champion basically, essentially, like, regenerative ecosystems. And when I say regenerative ecosystems, regenerative farming is a component of that, but it's not the whole piece. And I think sometimes, right now we're sitting in an era where regenerative is a buzzword, right? A lot of people are talking about it. 10 years ago, when I started talking about it and trying to talk about it in rooms of individuals that didn't know that at the time, that languaging, people told me I was crazy, right? I literally was labeled as like the crazy regenerative girl from Montana, which was awesome though, because the minute anyone started talking about regenerative, they just like pushed them in my direction. So I got to have some really beautiful conversations. But essentially, from starting that first company, I then expanded that into redesigning supply chains for farmers in the Bay Area and in Northern California. I started learning a lot more about actually farm development and the loss that we were having of land that regenerative farmers could actually farm on, which had to do with the financial crisis. It had to do with the workforce crisis. It had to do with a number of different aspects. And, at the same time, my family has had this land in Montana, the land that raised me, in our portfolio of assets. And it's even weird for me to call this land an asset because this land is such a part of my heart. It is really special. It's on the edge of a 2 million acre nature corridor in the Bitterroot Valley. It's prairies and wild forests and rivers. And it was actually has buildings on it that were built and designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And so in 1905, Frank Lloyd Wright came into the Bitterroot Valley and designed an entire community on my family's land that was never built. And somehow I had never known this growing up until I was around 23, and I found these plans in a closet. Like, you can't make it up. Like, I found these plans sitting in a closet, and suddenly this world of impact and this world of regeneration clicked with this history legacy of the man who really, in my perspective, what Frank Lloyd Wright did for real estate and architecture is he really came to light at the time when we were moving away from agriculture as the sole means of production. And his architecture reflects central communing spaces. It reflects building with nature. One of his quotes is one of my favorites. And he says, you trust nature, you love nature, and nature will never fail you. And to find out that this man who was such a beautiful teacher in terms of his aesthetic around architecture had kind of birthed a vision on land that raised me blew my mind. And I started diving really deep into, what if we rebuilt this vision? What if we actually were able to bring something back to life, but do it in a regenerative framework? And at the same time, with the impact work I was doing, I was seeing that in the nonprofit space, a lot of nonprofits were competing with one another. They were really aggressively pursuing donors because if you got the $10,000 grant, then I didn't get the $10,000 grant, right? And that made or break that organization for the year. And so all of a sudden, the third piece that I'll layer in is the climate crisis, right? We're having heartbreaking things we're seeing around the world in terms of the shift of climate and the shift of how we relate to land. And so within kind of these three buckets, I started seeing that we need to create engines. Really, I see them as regenerative engines that can fuel this shift into a regenerative economy. And when I say regenerative economy, I'm talking about an economy that's built upon an interdependence with nature, be it plant life, water life, ecosystems that we're a part of, right? It's a system that's not extractive capitalism, it's regenerative capitalism. And how all of this relates to development is actually pretty simple. in terms of development is an area where man and nature are in concert. Man and nature are ideally working together, whether that be just through a permitting agency that's deciding, this is the rule to build in this specific area because we have decided before that, right? All that a permitting agency is really a system that a group of people have agreed upon and rules for a certain area, right? So if you think about it, it's still a conversation with nature. It's just being translated through a government office. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was curious because there's a lot of different pathways that you can take. Like I've seen you in photos of just the spreads that you put on through culinary expressions of art. I see people that come from the food system background really dive in towards soil health and that the agricultural component. And whenever I talk with the regenerative ag folks, some of them, they really understand the connection that you're talking about. And some of them are still in this regeneration is about moving animals quickly over a piece of ground. And I wonder why you have really gone down this path of development is going to be the area of impact that is your sandbox that brings it together.
Completely. I think it's a really good point, and it's very similar to conservationists, right? There's a lot of conservationists that believe that we conserve land and we do not touch it, right? That's the best and the highest use of land. And I actually agree with that to a point. But the one thing I do know is that we're going to keep building buildings. We're going to keep creating structures. And there's a really unique opportunity to take traditional real estate capital and build these structures in a way that they're actually a financial engine that can give back to those regenerative grazers, that can conserve more land. And instead of relying on, say, a nonprofit donative structure, right, or a large endowment that requires, say, a large family office or an individual or a corporation to decide that they're going to champion, we can actually build financial vehicles that allow that piece of land to be protected in perpetuity. And so on each one of our Anura projects, we've created a engine through a hospitality vehicle that allows us to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars a year annually into the bioregion that project exists within. So not only am I able to fund the regenerative forestry practices on my own land and do workshops for the local community, but I'm also able to provide grants to that community as well. Because the big piece is with the climate crisis we're facing is people forget that forest doesn't stop for a fence line. And a lot of times I have seen these like really extremes, no building or all the building, right? Like we take these really extreme stances. We stand in a place where we feel like I am all for development. And that means not considering nature, not considering the community you're developing in, building as cheap as possible with materials that will deteriorate or toxify over time, and forget that there's actually a middle point. And so what I'm really interested in and what I've actually built my career doing is in creating the bridges. So how do we create a bridge from extractive development to regenerative development? How do we take traditional development capital and place it into projects that are offering a competitive return to a multifamily apartment building, but are actually doing community work, land work, and really putting money into those communities in a meaningful way? And so, I think something that I should also mention is a big reason why I decided to launch a financial vehicle to invest and develop these types of projects was because I've also sat in the investor seat. I was helping my family place capital and talking to some of the largest real estate funds and private boutique funds that exist in the US. And I was shocked because I would ask questions around, how are you considering climate modeling over the next 30 years? What buildings are you looking at? What is the GDP of the community that you're going into? And how do you see that affecting your project? And I actually I would make these managing partners not know how to answer. And it shocked me, right? People who had hundreds of millions of dollars under asset were not thinking about this in terms of an investment criteria.
What were they thinking about, Annalise? Like, what do you
Well,
see?
what I saw was from an investor standpoint that if I wanted to invest into impact, in terms of if I wanted to have a project that I knew went beyond the scope of just building four walls and a roof, right? But would give me the real estate return that my portfolio was looking for, which is a very specific return for anyone that has been in a family office or has managed a portfolio of capital. You understand what I'm talking about. I had to choose. I had to choose, can I have this return and invest with a group that say is getting that return through flipping apartment buildings, putting in new interiors and maybe changing the branding and putting a little bit of green space in, right? So that they're upcharging rent, or build something that's going to be more competitive in the market. And that's going to give me the return. That's going to be my return and the investor's return, right? And there hasn't been really a desire or a question to ask these bigger questions around impact, right? It's been around numbers on a spreadsheet.
This is the conversation that I was really looking forward to, because I've been finding this line within myself of how do I want to express a sentiment that I've held for a long time now. Whenever we started real estate investing over 10 years ago, what we learned was you go out and you buy an apartment building that's underperforming, that has deferred maintenance. You kick out the residents, you improve it, and then you release the apartment building at a higher rental rate, and that pushes up the value. And I understand how you can create financial value out of that, and we've certainly done a lot of it. But in the rearview mirror, something's not sitting right. Yeah. As well as now getting into the investment world at that upper echelon, where those professional fund managers and the single family offices, if they are just looking towards yield, it's like, maybe it's oil and gas because there's high depreciation. That's what they really need on their portfolio. Or now we've got self-storage because that's the new hot asset class. Or where I really get going is whenever it's large funds that are going after RV and mobile home parks, because they know that that's the lowest level of competition, or it was mainly mom and pop. And there's no other choice. I mean, if you're squeezing pad rents from $400 to $450, there's not a lot of options for those residents to go, and you can create a lot of value there. And so, just setting the stage here on the conversations, and I'm not trying to vilify the investing industry. I think this is the time that we can enhance it, but I want to know, once you start to introduce these ideas that's more oriented towards additional bottom lines, what has been the feedback of that? Like, how have you found these grounds? Is there receptive audiences on the other side?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting in this fundraising process, because I've spoken to some traditional investors that, are skeptical. And when I set forth to do this, and the team that I built was really around, how do I walk into a traditional capital room? How do I walk into an institutional room and have numbers and a team that institutional investor can trust and feel comfortable with? Because if I'm already doing something that's a bridge, I'm not going to push those numbers anyway. I'm going to have a great return, and I'm going to figure out how to do that. And thankfully, we've been able to do that. We have some amazing partners. We have an incredible ecosystem we've built. We have an amazing team of experts who've been doing this for a really long time. And so it's been helpful walking into those rooms where sometimes when I speak to someone, I don't actually speak about any of our impact work. I just present it as a real estate hospitality investment. We are a hospitality fund that offers X returns, that is able to give that to you over a 10-year period. We're a closed-end fund. We invest in these areas, and this is our criteria. And I'm very cut and dried, and I'm very simple about it. And then there's some people, I really love the network, the Creo network. They were an awesome group to talk to. For those of you who don't know, they're an impact investing network, and we're one of their approved projects. And the conversations that I had during the vetting process with them was like a breath of fresh air for me, because they asked me all the questions that I want to answer. How am I tracking the impact that we're doing? What does our model look like in terms of split between development, impact? How are we looking at this from an ecosystem perspective? What are the climate metrics we're measuring? And those are such important questions, right? And the financial model is an equally important question. And so, I think why I started this conversation talking about the impact and talking about the nonprofit space was because I really do believe that a lot of this is a semantic conversation and education conversation for both investors and also for fiduciaries to understand that you can actually do both. There are hard decisions you'll have to make in certain places, and our returns are paramount for our investors, but also that's because our returns to our investors also dictate the health of that project and then the health of the donations we can give to that bioregion, right? So one of my mentors says, and I love this, that everyone in life builds their own cage, right? Like we all build a cage, and we're choosing to build Anura, the cage of Anura, right? As a place where we do impact and we have a financial return and we get to do work that we love.
Why did you go into hospitality? What's the thread there?
Yeah. So there's a number of reasons why we chose to launch hospitality as the fund focus and what we wanted to both fund and develop. Number one, if you look at essentially the way that you can have an impact into a region, right? If you look at actually the transient taxes that come through hospitality, that money goes directly to the county level. So the hospitality tax then means that every guest that's coming to stay on the property is actually paying a certain amount that will go directly back to the county they're staying in. Affordable housing in terms of leasing doesn't do that, right? That goes to a state level and then that's disseminated. It's not actually at the county level. And then with hospitality, we're able to actually take a percentage of every night per stay and allocate that directly into the impact work through a donation, right? And that actually does trickle back to our investors as a donation and a tax write-off as a part of their investment. So for us, we look at hospitality as an investment, and our development partners have been building eco-hospitality projects for the last 10 years. They're experts in ecological development, in the hospitality building, and in the operating of those properties. And so we found these perfect partners to really invest and grow together with. And it became a no-brainer about how in our portfolio, we wanted to invest into hospitality that layered in education and then this nonprofit aspect as well. And so those kind of three prongs working together allow us to have a magic. That's what we call it. It's like the magic of a financial model that moves as an engine in terms of what that outcome is.
And let's get into that. But I'm curious around setting up the fund. Why do a fund where you're going and looking at different projects and multiple projects? And I'm putting words in your mouth because we've had conversations before. But why that instead of saying, here's the one project that we're going to do, and then we're going to operate and then go find a different one?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. One, my development partners have done a number of one-offhand developments and found that, doing that kind of like syndicated round, you would say, a lot of people will invest without the knowledge of actually how to develop that project, right? So say you have a line item where there's $500,000 that's towards piping and water maintenance, right? But someone who's a part of that project wants there to be a sculpture in the middle of the Grand Lodge that costs $500,000. And suddenly you'll be in a stalemate for months debating with this group about what is the actual use of the funds. And that means that that project has been delayed in terms of timeline, execution, a lot of things that come into it. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is because I also believe that we need this type of financial vehicle. We need an option for investors to be able to invest into a diversified portfolio of projects that will give them a return that also from an investment portfolio looking at climate is a smarter investment, right? Versus just placing, say, you have a $10 million investment. If you place a $10 million investment into one project, that one project really has to succeed, right? It really has to hit it out of the park. But if you put it into a fund that has, say, 3 to 5 assets in it that are all developing and launching, then you'll have a diversified return coming from that portfolio. So that's the second reason. The third reason is because it was the best way that I could find to actually protect the land and the engine we were building, right? A fund has a mandate. A fund has a group of legal documents that stipulates very clearly what we are investing to, what our background is, what our returns are, and what our expectations are, right? It's actually a way that we can preserve, like, and I hate to say it, but I do say it, of what happens if I get hit by a bus next week, right? If I get hit by a bus next week, that $100 million of dollars that investors have placed is still protected because it's of that investment mandate, right? The person that would replace me in my role in the fund would be adhering to the mandate that we set forward. So it allows a level of protection and a clear target for both our team and those investing into the fund to know that no matter what, your capital is going towards that vision. It's going towards that project. It is hitting those metrics because we have stipulated that, right? And it's our goal to hit those metrics, I should say. Like, that's what we're aiming towards. We're going towards that. And so that way, greenwashing can't happen. Us shifting the project suddenly can't happen. And we're investing into assets that we were very clearly are about our mandate. So those were the three main reasons that we chose to go in the fund direction.
I want to take a quick opportunity before we continue this episode to talk about the work we are doing at Latitude Regenerative Real Estate. We see real estate as a catalyst for regeneration where we can change the way that we inhabit the planet. The hard part, though, is that real estate is complex and it requires specialized knowledge in areas around design and planning, capital and investment, and community engagement and construction. That's why at Latitude, our work goes to serve those that seek to create legacy projects that strengthen communities and develop ecological resilience. If you are needing help putting together a project like this and could use an experienced and dynamic development and sales team, we hope that you'll reach out to us at chooselatitude.com. Okay, let's get back into the episode. I think that's a great segue into the impact and the education that you were talking about. What does it look like from the experience level around the property in the hospitality experience and the impact that you're taking? And then what are you bringing back to CREO and the investors to say, and this is what we did?
Yeah, each project that we look at right now, we have 2 projects that we're under contract with, and we're looking to fill the fund with 2 or 3 other projects. The way that we approach is we usually look at legacy land assets. So we look at assets that have been in families for quite a long time, right? And the project we're doing outside of Texas and outside of Austin, Texas, has been in a family for almost 30 years and will be in total about a 200-acre project that is in a riparian area. And we will be stewarding it back to health. And we'll be building a beautiful hospitality project on it with kind of a focus on arts and culture in a really meaningful way. And so on that project specifically, what I talk about a lot in terms of when you look at tracking and metrics around impact, there's actually been a lot of confusion in the space, right? Because people are just like, for climate, we're just going to track carbon, right? Or for farming, it's soil health, or for forest fires, it's burn ratio. Like, there's all these different things and languaging that gets looks around, but this is where my background in neuroscience comes in, is I'm really interested in data sets, right? I'm really interested in deep listening. And so the first phase that we go into when we look at a project is we look at the land from a really holistic framework, from soil, from ecological maintenance in terms of what needs to be preserved and conserved, and then what needs to be tended to, right? Is there an old growth forest that needs to be properly managed for fire? Is there a watershed that needs to be revitalized or structured in a way that it's preserved and it's not polluted? And then we really look at the surrounding community, right? We look at where that asset is located. You and I, Neil, were up in the Salish Sea looking at a really cool asset up there that ended up not being a fit for our fund. But, we looked at the community. What are the community needs? What's happening in that community? What is the major GDP looking like? what is the driver of the economy? Where's the economy failing? And why are people coming to this area, right? Most of the projects we look at are an hour to 2 hours outside of a major city and allow an individual to come and reconnect back to nature, right? And then once we kind of go through that layer, we really do a deep financial analysis, right? So on each of our projects, we look at a certain room count that we know that we need to hit to make our financial models work, right? We've have a team that has over 20 to 30 years of expertise building these models, managing assets, and deploying capital. So we're able to bring together individuals that have a background in hospitality operations and also in fund management. You know, one of our employees worked with Oko Group, who is Amon's portfolio project, helping deploy capital, develop Amon properties, and manage those assets as well. We have an individual who's built and launched multiple funds. So we have this beautiful brain trust that we go to, and we go to each project and look at. And then once we kind of get through the financial modeling stage, which is really important to us, you know, at the end of the day, yes, we're doing impact work, but at the end of the day, we're really fiduciaries, right? Our goal is to have a return for our investors and have profitable projects that benefit all of us, because our thesis doesn't work without that. And that's also, you know, I'm an entrepreneur and I know better than anyone that making a profit is integral and is our goal. And so that's the next phase that we go through. And so if kind of these three buckets check out, we do a much deeper dive into that property and we start looking at design. We start looking at how would we build on this land, right? What areas would we conserve? What areas would we give to the community to use towards community farming or community education, or to place what we call a bioregional hub on it? And so that's been kind of the piece where we're able to weave in the impact. So on each one of our properties, we build, or we are building, a hospitality aspect, right? So the hospitality is a beautiful kind of like eco luxury resort that guests come and stay in. Our price point is between $600 to $1,200 per night. And we build really unique units that guests can be in and be interactive in nature, with a full culinary program and an adventure program that helps them really enjoy where they are. And then we bring in an education partner. An example of that would be on the property in Montana. We've actually partnered with the School of Architecture, founded by Frank Lloyd Wright. And so they will be moving their campus onto the property, and they will be training the next era of regenerative architects and keeping going with Frank Lloyd Wright's pedagogy on site, right? And from an investment perspective, that actually gives us access to educational tax breaks for having them on site. And then the third piece that we bring onto our projects is we fund what we call a bioregional hub. That's where we're doing this tracking that we're talking about, right? That's the research and resource center for a bioregion. And bioregional hubs are incredible. The concept of it was developed in the 70s. There's been iterations of it where essentially it's a community space that is focused on the health and the well-being of that bioregion. And when I say bioregion, it's important to differentiate that we're not talking about state lines, right? We're not talking about county lines. We're talking about an ecological biology that makes up a bioregion, right? And it's different place to place. You know, in Hawaii, the indigenous Hawaiians used to call different bioregions, it was land was demarcated by rivers, right? Like one family owned this part that was between rivers, and it actually went up the mountain. It went from the volcano all the way to the sea. And that was one family's homestead. That was one little bioregion, right? It's using ecological factors to demarcate boundaries.
And so what will be taking place at the bioregions? How do you see that coming together?
Yeah, so at the bioregional hubs, we've been working on this with a number of amazing humans from the Buckminster Fuller Institute, members that have worked at the World Bank, professors that are at Oxford, on this concept of really what is a bioregional hub. And there's already so many leading experts in this space. You know, Joe Brewer is doing amazing work with bioregional learning facilities. There's individuals that have really stepped forward with how do bioregions come together and aggregate data and make informed decisions to better their own bioregion, right? And so the big piece, and I've been working with a really wonderful woman, her name's Samantha Power. She is launching a bioregional financing facility. And so why that's important to the development and the financial work that we're doing is that we're actually able to not only fund the development of these community spaces, of these bioregional hubs, but with the donations of hundreds of thousands of dollars into that bioregional bank every month, we can actually start to develop and fund regenerative systems design and regenerative projects on the land in real time in those communities, right? And so what that looks like is looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So we look at food, water, shelter, and then what I believe is kind of the fourth unspoken need, which is economic opportunity. So the bioregional hub essentially exists as this like research and resource for bioregions. And traditionally, that have just been volunteer networks coming together. And the question has really been around funding, right? It's been either privately funded or one person leads it, right? And like is doing great work, but then that person leaves and kind of the community structure falls away. And so at Anura, we have a real engine that can fund ongoing bioregional work through these bioregional hubs, right? We can suddenly say, not only are we building these spaces, but we are going to be donating hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year to that bioregion, which is the site of each of our projects. And so when it comes to tracking, what I always say is each bioregion has its own specific needs. And so the first stage of the bioregional hub is to do the deep listening of what those needs are, and then to formulate a tracking strategy around those needs. There will always be an ecological tracking strategy in terms of using MRVs such as carbon or migratory herd routes, water health. There's amazing work that a group is doing in Cascadia. It's a group called Regenerative Cascadia. They're awesome. They're self-organizing. They're a bioregional hub that is, one of the largest watersheds in the Pacific Northwest. And they're doing really beautiful work when it comes to tracking around how climate is affecting their community. And they're able to put resources to that area. And so the bioregional hub concept is nothing new, but the way to fund it has been the question. And so we're really excited and really proud that our development fund will be able to fund the bioregional hubs on each one of our sites. So that means for the 4 to 5 properties that we're developing, we will be developing and funding 4 to 5 bioregional hubs. So that's hopefully 4 to 5 bioregions that we get to support moving into a regenerative economy and with climate resiliency going forward.
That actually ties a lot together. I was part of that tour that Joe Bird went on for the Regenerate Cascadia, and it was, he's largely been on a philanthropic, like this is the funding mechanism that we could do it on, and it's like, well, that's a lot of fundraising, and coming from the nonprofit world, like it's an exhausting wheel to be on. Of just like you're never quite off of that, so creating those bridges, I think, is imperative for that work.
And I also really wish people knew that it was possible. Like our financial models are showing that it's possible. Like it's possible to both build something that is beautiful and impactful and that you love, and you make a great return doing it while you're doing good in your community, right? And what's amazing also about this bioregional work is it only makes Anura properties more resilient in the face of climate. Right? Like it's actually giving back to that asset as well. And so I think if more developers started to look at a holistic framework of how are they building, why are they building, what is the community they're building into, and understand that a rising tide helps all ships, then suddenly we'd have a really different framework for building. And Neil, you said something when you started this podcast off that was really interesting, which was the question of where are the female developers? And it's been really interesting because as I've met the few of us that are developing in this space, most of us are developing with the lens of community. And I actually think women, we're mothers, we're wired from a genetic standpoint to think about community and to think about interconnection. And I do believe men are as well. But, I think there are certain questions that women ask when they're developing spaces that may not be as top of mind of, say, a man's mind when he does this. I'm still very much a businesswoman at the end of the day, right? I have my own goals to hit, and I realize that I can only do this work hitting those goals. But I knew that I could only be a developer if it aligned with the values that I had. And so I'm building the financial engine that can do that.
In that vein, Analise, I've heard that more generational wealth is transferring into the hands of females than males. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Completely. It's something that I actually talk about extensively. The other piece that I'm really passionate about is female investors and educating women on how to invest and everything from what are startup ecosystems to bigger portfolios, because really we are at this giant wealth transformation moment. And, a great example is one of our investors inherited a large family office portfolio, and she has been divesting her entire portfolio into a regenerative portfolio. She has been selling the skyscraper buildings. She has been retrofitting the buildings she can with as most sustainable techniques as possible. And she has been reinvesting into land, into community, not just because it's with her values, but also because it's smart investing. It's smart to look at the factors that data and science are showing us when you're looking at growing a portfolio of wealth to sustain a family legacy. And I get really excited when I think about more money in more women's hands, because it is proven that women make investments back into their community. There's this very old story that I heard ages ago in the nonprofit space of, you would give a man in, say, Central Africa a $10, right, to do something with, and he'll go buy a stereo. And you give that to a woman and she buys school books for her children, right? And then she goes and gives the other half to her sister next door so she can do the same. And so there's this natural giving back that occurs, I think, because, women also right now have the highest rate of autoimmune condition and are actually being directly impacted from unhealthy buildings, from the unhealthy environments that are taking place. Like, our physical bodies are reacting to that as well. And so I'm excited. I want more women to not only have wealth, but know how to deploy that wealth, right? And to create engines where those women are able to not only deploy the wealth and gain more wealth, but it just keeps perpetuating, right? So I do believe that we're at this precipice of women having a voice in the room is going to really shift the way that capital is being used. Like, one of my favorite things to have ever happened this year was, I don't know if you saw the tweet that Elon Musk did towards Mackenzie Bezos, where he was like, "You're giving too much money away," basically. And what she did in response was, hands down, I think, my favorite thing I've ever seen a woman do, or just a human even on this planet do. In response to that tweet, she doubled her donations, which, like, just kind of encapsulates it for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different paths that we could go down there that like really strike some of our experience living across the world and microfinance in Bangladesh and things like that. But what is coming up for me is, if you're positioned as an impact fund and you are going out and you're raising money that way, you kind of have this interesting, are you a first mover and you have an advantage because of that? Or do we really need to start to mature this industry so that there's more of a pipeline and more options for family offices and investors to say, okay, if we want to make the transition to 100% impact, they need deal flow, right? They are professional fund allocators. So how do you see the impact investment industry evolving?
I see it only growing. And hopefully it grows to a place where we don't even say impact investing. We just say investing, because we know that we can invest into projects that are giving back in a meaningful way, right? Like, yes, we are an impact fund, but we are a fund that's focused on actually doing what's best for our investors' capital. And I believe what's best for our investors' capital is to also be aware of climate risks and community risks and to mitigate against those. So, we can look at it from a couple of different lenses. One, from just a real estate lens, I believe that there's projects that are being left on the table because they're not at the like $500 million fund size to $2 billion fund size, right? Those projects can't be developed, or they're too small for a syndicated round. We're like looking at projects that kind of sit in the middle of it. Those are the $20 to $50 million, equity debt split projects. They're not quite big for the, institutional shops, and they're a little bit too big for the small syndicated rounds, right? So from a real estate perspective, I actually do think that there's huge opportunity. We're seeing it right now in terms of our pipeline and our deal flow, a huge opportunity for kind of this sweet spot that we're placing our fund in, our $100 million fund. And then secondly, from the investors landscape, I actually do think that because of this wealth transfer, and because it's not just women, actually, I do think men too are waking up both sexes to this truth of my money has power, where I place my investment has an impact, that wants to see more real estate offerings, right? Say, for example, and I hope it spreads into many other industries, right? I would love there in every single industry there to be a portfolio of funds and investment opportunities that take community into mind, that take soil health into mind, that do these things and begin to slowly redirect that trillions of capital into these projects. There's an amazing entrepreneur that I absolutely love. Her name's Janet. She's out of the Dominican Republic, and she's built this incredible cacao company. And she basically has built cacao as a fully regenerative system in the Dominican Republic, where she traced, took her 3 years to just do contract law, to like figure out who was the supplier, who was the grower, who was the transporter. And if you know anything about cacao commodities, it's kind of a nightmare, to be honest. And it's very majoritarily owned. And she essentially has circumnavigated all of that. And so not only has she rebirthed an industry on an island ecosystem, she's built a processing plant where suddenly there's equitable distribution of wages, where suddenly people have pride because they actually know what they're doing in that regenerative system. And then she launches both a public facing company, a chocolate company, and also a wholesale brand where she's, supplying other chocolate companies. And suddenly, like, that is a regenerative economy right there, right? So that investor investing into her chocolate company is investing into an ecosystem of community development. And it's also giving her the edge, right? She now has a fully vertically integrated company with less competition. So me as an investor looking at that project to invest into not only sees a brilliant woman who's lovely and kind and who's giving back to the people she loves, but a really sharp businesswoman. So in my mind, I'm like, is that an impact investment or is that just a smart investment?
Well, they're two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
And I love that it's like, I don't want to call it impact investing. I just want to call it investing. And hopefully over time that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's still just so driven by opportunistic yield seeking investment. So we'll certainly
But I think,
see.
let me just pause though and say though,
Yeah.
I don't think that you have to lose the opportunistic yield. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, we can have opportunistic yields and high returns by doing projects that also do good.
Oh, I know. I think that's why this show exists, right? But I still see, if an economic event happens where all of a sudden our single family residences across the country take a huge hit because of monetary policy and secondary markets, there's still $1 billion funds, $6 billion funds that are coming out and buying corporate owned and managed single family homes now. And that it's not necessarily community minded. They want to tell you that it's community minded, that they put 10,000 people to work overnight, but it's opportunistic in the sense that there's yield out there and we're going to go chase it. And that's where we're going to direct billions of dollars. And that's why I think it's so interesting to watch you and so eloquently be able to say, look, I want to protect investor capital, but I also think that this is the best way to invest investor capital is to have these multiple bottom line outcomes. And so from there, Analise, I think there's two more questions that I've got. One, total softball, which is, what is the name Anura? Where did that come from?
So Anura is actually the stage of regenesis that a tadpole goes through to become a frog.
Awesome.
And
how did you find out about that?
Well, first of all, if you haven't figured it out yet, I am a giant nerd. And secondly, I worked with a really dear mentor of mine who I absolutely adore when we were going through this naming process, who helped me understand kind of what our brand was about and what we were looking to do. And Anura was a name that we came up with, and everyone just kind of stopped in the room and looked at everyone where we were like, this is it. This is what we're doing.
That's so cool. Awesome. I want to see like the brand with the frog on it though. That's
it's actually interesting because this has been, and this might be like a little interesting conversation to have because it's been this fine line that we've been walking as a fund around how do we actually present ourselves as a true financial instrument, right? And not and still be able to have conversation with nonprofits, right? But if I have a frog at the center of my logo, then suddenly you think, right? This is a branding exercise. This is for my branding neuroscience dates of like, you're like rainforest, like impact. You might not think financial return in the same sense, right? So for us, we're walking that line of financial impact and return hand in hand, right? And we really know that and we're aware of it. And, it goes to the values of how we're investing, but then even how we present our brand is that we are financial return first with this impact layer that we believe is just smart investing on top of it.
That's great. And where are you in the raise, Analise? If people wanted to invest into the fund, is it open? Is it closed? Like what process are you at right now?
So I'm actually really excited. We are officially launching the fund next month. We are taking early meetings now. We have a few investors that are already signing solicitation agreements with us, and we will be officially taking meetings coming May 15th. So
that's so exciting.
Yeah, it's been great. It's, for me, it's a culmination over 10 years of work to get to this place. And many of my teammates, 20 years of work of working really diligently. So we're thrilled to be able to be in this position.
Yeah, and it's fun. I've seen your deck, and so to hear the deck expressed and articulated in verbal form is also really fun. It's an amazing team that you've assembled too. So excited to see that launch. And what are the ways in which people can get a hold of you or somebody from your team if they are interested in either investing capital into it, or if they've got a property that would be a good fit, or just want to connect with you on a one-on-one basis?
So they can go to our website. It's anura.earth. So that's ANURA.earth. You can go down to the bottom of the page and we have an inquiry form, and that goes directly to our team, and someone will reach out with you to kind of meet with you and see if you're interested. And, I think that if the other question I would say, if you really would like to be involved, we also will be accepting donations into the Bioregional Hub Institute that we're putting together for those that want to donate to this movement of bioregionalism. So we have a couple of different ways that people can step in, and are really excited to kind of create a chorus of individuals that want to sing this song really loud with us.
That's so fun. Well, I wish you guys all the luck in creating really special properties and in the development of the fund. And so it's a pleasure to have you on, Analise. I'm sure it won't be the last time. And we'll do it again.
Sounds good.
Okay, that is a wrap. Thank you for tuning in to the show today. If you got any value out of this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss future episodes. I can honestly say that these conversations have changed my life, my business, and how I steward my own home. If you want to learn more about our work at Latitude, where we partner with property owners, developers, and stewards to create thriving communities and resilient habitats, then you can find us online at chooselatitude.com. Also, if you have a project that you are needing help bringing to life or would like to align your investment portfolio with profitable investment opportunities that benefit communities and the environment, then you can reach out to me directly at neil@chooselatitude.com, and we can start a conversation from there. Okay, that's it. Until next time, here's a friendly reminder that the water we drink falls from the heavens. The air we breathe comes from the beautiful symbiotic relationship we have with plants. The food that nourishes our bodies come from the ground we so cavalierly pave over, and that we all have a role to play to regenerate this planet.